The blood-red sun painted the horizon as Tabitha Prescott slammed the door of her father's general store, her ears still burning from the laughter that followed her down Main Street. Durango, Colorado in 1875 was no place for a woman without a man, or so everyone seemed determined to remind her daily. "Miss Prescott," called Mrs. Henderson from across the dusty thoroughfare. "I heard the widow Johnson is hosting a social tomorrow evening. Perhaps you'll finally find someone to court you." Her cackling laughter joined the chorus of women gathered at the millinery shop. Tabitha quickened her pace, clutching the ledger books tightly against her chest. At 24, she was well past the age most women in Durango had married and started families. It wasn't for lack of suitors, at least initially. Her honey blonde hair and striking green eyes had drawn plenty of attention when she'd first arrived 3 years ago with her father to open the town's first proper general store. But her sharp tongue and sharper mind had driven away most potential husbands. "A man wants a wife, not a business partner," her father had explained gently after yet another suitor had stopped calling. But Samuel Prescott had encouraged his daughter's head for numbers nonetheless, teaching her every aspect of running the store. As Tabitha rounded the corner onto Cedar Street, a figure on horseback caught her eye. Yancey Nash sat tall in the saddle, his familiar worn leather hat pulled low over his eyes. The afternoon sunlight caught in his sandy brown hair as he dismounted in front of the blacksmith's. Yancey had been working for her father since they'd arrived in Durango, helping with deliveries and the heavy lifting around the store. At 30, he was quiet and reserved, keeping mostly to himself. The ladies in town considered him handsome enough with his broad shoulders and strong jawline, but his tendency to disappear for weeks at a time trailing cattle drives or hunting in the mountains made him an unpredictable prospect for marriage. "Afternoon, Miss Tabitha," he called, tipping his hat. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the only evidence of emotion on his otherwise stoic face. "Mr. Nash," she nodded curtly, not slowing her pace. She wasn't in the mood for conversation, even with Yancey, who had always been kind to her. "Those books look heavy," he said, falling into step beside her. "Allow me." Before she could protest, he'd taken the ledgers from her arms. She sighed, resigned to his company for the walk back to the store. "I heard them, you know," he said quietly after they'd walked in silence for several moments. "Heard who?" Tabitha asked, though she knew perfectly well what he meant. "Those cackling hens outside the millinery. Don't pay them any mind, Miss Tabitha. They've got nothing better to do than pick at others." Tabitha felt her cheeks flush. "It doesn't bother me what they think." "Of course not," Yancey replied, a hint of amusement in his deep voice. "That's why you're walking like there's a rattler at your heels." She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. "Mr. Nash, I appreciate your concern, but I am perfectly capable of handling a few gossips." "Never doubted it for a moment," he said, his expression serious though his eyes still held that glint of humor. "Your father sent me to find you. The supply wagon from Denver arrived early, and he needs help tallying the goods." Tabitha nodded, resuming her walk toward the general store. The familiar sight of Prescott's general merchandise painted in bold letters above the entrance calmed her somewhat. Here, at least, she had purpose. She was respected for her abilities, not judged for her marital status. Inside, the store smelled of coffee, leather, and the sweet aroma of candy from the glass jars lined up on the counter. Her father was directing 2 men unloading crates from a wagon out back. "Ah, there you are, Tabby," Samuel Prescott called cheerfully. At 60, he was still spry, though his hair had gone completely white and the lines around his eyes had deepened over the past year. "The invoices need checking. Would you mind?" "Of course, father." She took the papers he offered and settled at the small desk behind the counter, grateful for the distraction of work. Yancey set the ledgers beside her and moved to help with the unloading. Tabitha watched him for a moment, the way he easily lifted crates that would require 2 average men to carry. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that contrasted with the chaos of the busy store. Later that evening, after the store had closed and her father had retired to his rooms upstairs, Tabitha sat alone at the desk, finalizing the day's accounts. A soft knock at the back door startled her. "Just me," Yancey called before she could reach for the rifle her father kept under the counter. He stepped inside, removing his hat. "Sorry to disturb you, Miss Tabitha, but I noticed the light still burning. Everything all right?" "Fine, thank you," she replied, returning to her work. "Just finishing up here." Yancey leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You work too hard." "Someone has to," she said without looking up. "Father isn't getting any younger, and you're missing out on living while you're keeping these books." This made her raise her head, a sharp retort ready on her tongue. But something in his expression stopped her, not pity, but a kind of understanding that caught her off guard. "What would you suggest, Mr. Nash?" "That I attend the widow Johnson's social and simper for the attention of men who want nothing more than a pretty face to cook their meals and bear their children." Yancey's mouth quirked up at one corner. "No, I don't reckon that would suit you at all." He pushed away from the doorframe and approached the desk. "But there's a dance Saturday next at the Hutchinson Ranch. Fresh air might do you good." "A dance?" Tabitha laughed without humor. "To be paraded as the town spinster? No, thank you, you wouldn't be going alone," he said simply. She stared at him, confused. "I don't understand." "I'm asking if you'd accompany me, Miss Tabitha." The unexpected invitation left her momentarily speechless. "Why?" she finally managed. Yancey shrugged, his expression giving away nothing. "Maybe I'm tired of watching those women make you feel less than what you are." "And what am I, Mr. Nash?" "The smartest, strongest woman in this territory," he said without hesitation. "And they know it, which is why they try to tear you down." Tabitha felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. No one had ever spoken of her that way before. I'll consider it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." He settled his hat back on his head and turned to leave. At the door he paused. "Good night, Miss Tabitha." "Good night, Mr. Nash." After he'd gone, Tabitha sat for a long while, staring at the ledger but seeing nothing. The prospect of attending the dance with Yancey Nash left her with a strange fluttering in her stomach that she wasn't entirely sure she disliked. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect September day that made the mountains seem closer than they were. Tabitha arrived at the store early, as was her custom, to prepare for opening. She was surprised to find Yancey already there, sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store. "You're here early," she observed, unlocking the door. "Thought I'd get a head start," he replied. "Your father mentioned wanting to rearrange the dry goods section today." "That's kind of you." She hesitated, then added, "About the dance. I would like to go with you, that is." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious expression. "I'll pick you up at 6 then." The days leading up to the dance passed in a blur of anticipation and nervousness that Tabitha hadn't felt since she was a schoolgirl. When Saturday arrived, she found herself staring at her limited wardrobe with dismay. Nothing seemed appropriate for the occasion. A knock at her door revealed her father holding a large box. "This came for you," he said, his eyes twinkling. Inside was a beautiful dress of deep blue silk, simple yet elegant, with a note that read only, "Something worthy of you, why?" The gift left her breathless. Such a dress would have cost Yancey at least a month's wages. She wasn't sure whether to be touched by his generosity or offended by his presumption. When he arrived that evening, looking uncomfortable but handsome in a clean black suit, she confronted him immediately. "The dress is too much, Mr. Nash. I cannot accept such an extravagant gift." "It's just a dress, Miss Tabitha," he said quietly. "And it would please me greatly to see you wearing it tonight." Something in his steady gaze made her relent. "Very well. But this doesn't mean anything except I wanted to do something nice for you," he interrupted gently. "Shall we go?" The Hutchinson Ranch was transformed for the evening, lanterns strung between trees creating pools of golden light in the gathering dusk. A platform had been erected for the musicians, and already couples were spinning to the lively tunes of fiddle and banjo. Tabitha felt every eye turn toward them as they arrived. Whispers followed them across the yard, and she caught snippets of conversation. With Yancey Nash of all people, never thought she'd find anyone. Probably desperate enough to take the first man who asked, she stiffened, ready to turn and leave, but Yancey's hand at the small of her back steadied her. "They're just jealous," he murmured close to her ear. "You're the loveliest woman here tonight." Before she could respond, he was leading her to the dance floor, one hand taking hers while the other settled respectfully at her waist. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "That makes two of us," she admitted. But as they moved together to the music, Tabitha found herself relaxing into his arms. Yancey might not have been the most graceful dancer, but he was sure and confident in his movements, never once stepping on her toes or missing a beat. "You've been holding out on me, Mr. Nash," she said after their third dance. "You dance quite well for someone who claims no skill." "I had a good teacher," he replied. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly." "You've never mentioned your family before." A shadow passed over his face. "Not much to tell, parents gone now, brothers scattered to the winds." Before she could ask more, they were interrupted by Florence Henderson and her husband, the town banker. "Well, Miss Prescott," Florence said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How surprising to see you here, and with Mr. Nash. We all wondered when you'd finally settle for what you could get." Tabitha felt Yancey tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "I haven't settled for anything, Mrs. Henderson. I've simply chosen to spend my evening with someone whose company I enjoy, something I suspect you know little about." Florence's face reddened, and her husband quickly steered her away, muttering apologies. "That was unkind of me," Tabitha sighed once they were alone. "But well-deserved," Yancey replied, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Would you like some punch?" "You must be thirsty after putting Florence in her place." Laughing, Tabitha nodded, and they made their way to the refreshment table. The evening continued pleasantly, with more dancing and conversation. Yancey introduced her to several ranch hands she'd never met, men who treated her with respect and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on everything from cattle prices to politics. As the night drew to a close, Yancey suggested they take a walk to cool off. The September air had grown crisp, and Tabitha shivered slightly in her silk dress. Without a word, Yancey removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of the wool, carrying his scent of leather and pine, enveloped her comfortingly. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," she said as they strolled beneath the stars. "I've enjoyed myself more than I expected." "I'm glad," he replied simply. Then, after a pause, "You deserve more nights like this, Tabitha, more joy, more laughter." It was the first time he'd used her name without the formal miss, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart skip. "Why did you really invite me tonight, Yancey?" she asked softly. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Because I've watched you hold your head high while this town tries to make you feel less than. Because you're kind to everyone who comes into that store, even those who gossip about you behind your back. Because you're the only person who sees me as more than just a hired hand or a drifter." His honesty took her breath away. "I didn't think you noticed me at all," she admitted. "I've noticed you every day for 3 years, Tabitha Prescott," he said quietly. "Every single day." The ride back to town was filled with a comfortable silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached her home above the store, Yancey helped her down from the wagon with gentle hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you again for the dress," she said, removing his coat and handing it back. "And for a wonderful evening." "The pleasure was mine," he replied, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Yancey." She watched him drive away before entering the store, her mind whirling with new possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider before. Over the next few weeks, Durango buzzed with gossip about Tabitha Prescott and Yancey Nash. They were seen together, frequently riding out to the creek on Sunday afternoons, sharing meals at the cafe, walking arm in arm through town. Tabitha found herself caring less and less about the whispers that followed them. There was something liberating about being with Yancey. He listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and never once suggested she should be anything other than exactly who she was. For the first time in her life, Tabitha felt truly seen. But just as autumn was giving way to winter, disaster struck. Samuel Prescott collapsed while inventory was being taken, his face gray and his left arm clutched to his chest. The doctor was summoned immediately, but by nightfall, he delivered the grim news that Tabitha had been dreading her father had suffered an apoplexy, and while he lived, he would never fully recover. The following days were a blur of grief and responsibility. Tabitha barely left her father's bedside, reading to him for hours even though he showed little sign of understanding. The store remained closed, and bills began to pile up unpaid. It was Yancey who finally intervened, arriving one evening with a basket of food and a determined expression. "You need to rest," he told her firmly. "I'll sit with him." Too exhausted to argue, Tabitha surrendered her post and retreated to her room, where she fell into a dreamless sleep for the first time in days. When she awoke, she found Yancey in the kitchen, cooking breakfast as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The store needs to reopen," he said without preamble, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "I've already spoken to Doc Wilson, and he's recommended a nurse who can care for your father during the day." "I can't afford," she began. "I've taken care of it," he interrupted. "Consider it an advance on my wages." "Wages?" she echoed, confused, "but the store's closed." "I haven't paid you in weeks." "Then it's about time you did," he said with a slight smile. "I'll run the store with you, Tabitha. We'll make it work together." His confidence gave her hope when she had none left. That very afternoon, they reopened Prescott's general merchandise, with Yancey managing the physical labor while Tabitha handled the accounts and customer service. To her surprise, the town rallied around them. Women who had once mocked her spinsterhood now brought casseroles and offered to sit with her father. Men who had dismissed her business acumen now sought her advice on purchases and investments. "They respect you," Yancey observed one evening as they closed up shop. "They always have, whether they showed it or not." "It's different now," she admitted. "Everything's different," he nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. Her relationship with Yancey had changed too, deepened into something neither of them had put into words yet. As Christmas approached, bringing with it the first heavy snows of the season, Samuel Prescott's condition worsened. Tabitha spent every moment she could spare at his bedside, reading his favorite passages from the Bible and telling him about the day's business. On a particularly bitter December evening, Yancey found her there, tears streaming silently down her face as she held her father's frail hand. "He's getting worse," she whispered as Yancey knelt beside her chair. "I'm losing him, Yancey." Without a word, he gathered her into his arms, letting her sob against his chest until she had no tears left. Then he gently wiped her face with his handkerchief and said, "Your father is the proudest man I know, Tabitha. Proud of this store, proud of this town, but most of all proud of you." "How do you know?" she asked, her voice small. "Because he told me so the day I asked for his blessing to court you properly." Yancey's eyes never left hers as he spoke. "That was 2 months ago, before he fell ill. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you, but maybe there isn't one." Tabitha stared at him, stunned. "You asked my father's permission to court me, before the dance," he nodded. "I've loved you for years, Tabitha Prescott, watching you from afar, respecting your independence, admiring your strength. But when I heard those women laughing at you that day on Main Street, something in me couldn't stay silent anymore." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" she asked, her heart pounding. "You weren't ready to hear it," he said simply, "and I was content to wait until you were." In that moment, looking into his earnest blue eyes, Tabitha realized the truth that had been in front of her all along. Yancey Nash had been her constant, her support, her friend through everything. And somewhere along the way, without her even noticing, he had become essential to her happiness. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. "I think perhaps I always have." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then marry me," he said. "Not because you need a man or because the town expects it, but because we belong together, you and I." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Yancey Nash." They were wed on Christmas Eve in a simple ceremony beside Samuel Prescott's bed. Though weak, he was lucid enough to give his daughter away, tears of joy tracking down his weathered cheeks as Yancey and Tabitha exchanged their vows. The townsfolk filled the small apartment above the store, witnesses to the union that many claimed they had seen coming all along, though Tabitha knew better. Florence Henderson approached her after the ceremony, her usual haughtiness replaced by something that almost resembled contrition. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Nash," she said, the new name sounding strange but wonderful to Tabitha's ears. "We all misjudged you and Mr. Nash. It seems you've had a good man all along." Before Tabitha could respond, Yancey appeared at her side, his arm sliding protectively around her waist. "She's had me all along," he confirmed, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Even when neither of us knew it yet." Florence had the grace to look embarrassed as murmurs of agreement spread through the gathering. Tabitha leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling a contentment she'd never known before. Samuel Prescott passed peacefully in his sleep 3 days after the wedding. Though grief-stricken, Tabitha found strength in Yancey's unwavering support. Together, they laid her father to rest on a hillside overlooking the town he had helped build. "What happens now?" she asked Yancey as they stood hand in hand by the fresh grave. "Now we live," he answered, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We run the store, we build our home, we make our own family." Together, spring came early that year, bringing with it new life and possibilities. Prescott's general merchandise, now run jointly by Mr. and Mrs. Nash, thrived under their combined expertise. Yancey's knowledge of ranching and hunting complemented Tabitha's financial acumen, and soon they had expanded to include a successful trading post for trappers and hunters in the region. As April turned to May, Tabitha discovered she was expecting their first child, news that filled Yancey with such obvious joy that it banished any lingering doubts she might have harbored about their hasty marriage. "A son," he would murmur each night as they lay in bed, his large hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Or a daughter, doesn't matter as long as they have your spirit. And your heart," she would reply, kissing him softly. By summer, Tabitha's condition was obvious to everyone in Durango. The same women who had once mocked her spinsterhood now fussed over her health and shared advice about childbirth and motherhood. She accepted their attention with grace, finding it easier to forgive now that she understood the true meaning of happiness. On a warm August evening, as Tabitha and Yancey sat on the porch of their new home on the outskirts of town, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, she reflected on how completely her life had changed in less than a year. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day?" she asked, her hand finding his. "If you'd let me keep walking home alone with those ledgers?" Yancey considered the question seriously, as he did everything. "I reckon we'd have found our way to each other eventually," he said finally. "Some things are just meant to be, Tabitha, like you and me." "Is that what you believe, that we were destined for each other?" he smiled, the expression transforming his face in the way that still made her heart skip. "What I believe is that I recognized something in you the first moment I saw you, a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to be judged and found wanting by people who didn't know the first thing about you." "And now?" she asked, her free hand cradling her swollen belly. "Now I know I was right all along," he said, leaning over to kiss her tenderly. "You're exactly where you belong, Tabitha Nash, right here with me." As their child kicked beneath her hand, Tabitha closed her eyes and gave silent thanks for the man beside her, the man who had loved her all along, waiting patiently for her to recognize what had been in front of her the entire time. 5 years later, Tabitha stood on that same porch, watching as Yancey taught their son Samuel to ride his first pony while their 3-year-old daughter Alina clapped her hands in delight. Prescott's general merchandise had expanded to 3 locations across the territory, managed by trusted employees while the Nashes focused on their growing family. "Mama, look," Samuel called as he completed his first solo circuit of the corral. "I'm riding just like Papa." "I see you, darling," she called back, her heart full of pride. Yancey caught her eye over their son's head, his love for her as evident now as it had been on their wedding day. They had weathered storms together, literal and figurative, building a life that neither of them could have imagined alone. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Tabitha thought of the women who had once laughed at her for having no man. If they could see her now, surrounded by love and purpose, would they understand that happiness came not from conforming to expectations, but from finding the courage to forge your own path? Perhaps not. But it no longer mattered what anyone else thought. Tabitha Nash had everything she needed: a thriving business, beautiful children, and a husband who had loved her all along, even when she hadn't been ready to see it. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was worth everything.